So, welcome back to another episode of the Mindset Athlete podcast. And on today's show, I've got Michael Frogley, aka Coach Frogley. So, welcome onto the show.
Hey, good to be here.
Well, you are synonymously known around the world of wheelchair basketball as like the godfather. Because I had the pleasure of having Patrick Anderson, obviously one of your players in the Canadian national team years and years ago, come on to the show. I can't remember exactly when, but as in he couldn't talk highly of you. And obviously we were talking about some of the reflective moments you had of your time with the Canadian team in the Paralympics in Beijing, where I was discussing obviously that was how I probably fell in love with the sport in the real terms, because I've done it the opposite way round to most players that go into the sport where they start from juniors. I had the opportunity from being a fellow a competitor to be there and then go as a what they call it on the, well, I think it's like an athlete ticket, so you get to go as a fellow competitor. So I got to see wheelchair basketball at the very pinnacle of the sport. And you were mentioning some of the reflective moments you had of that game. Would you mind sharing that with obviously the listeners again, so they can obviously have the opportunity of the discussion I was talking to you before we hit record?
Well, yeah, a couple things. First, kind of reflecting on Patrick. Pat was just so much fun to coach. And it's funny because we grew up sort of and grew together in our evolution. Him as a player, me as a coach. When he was just starting out, I met him first when he was like 15, 16 years old, and he was a good young player. And he was just starting to grow into himself. And I had just started coaching, and so we very much have been on this journey, growing alongside each other, and it's been great working with him because I've had coaches ask me in the past. They say, "Man, it must be really easy coaching Pat because you don't have to do anything." And what I always tell coaches, it's actually no, it's the exact opposite. Pat is it's a great challenge to coach him in a good way because you are constantly pushed to think of how you can make a great player like Patrick, and arguably the greatest of all time, even better. You don't just sit back and do nothing. You're constantly pushed yourself to become a better coach to help him become the best that he can be. So absolute pleasure to coach Patrick all these years, and I still I chat with him on a regular basis, and so a lot of fun. That games that you're talking about, that first one, the 2008 games, was it was a really neat games in many ways. One, obviously, being in Beijing, it was a coming out party for China. It was an opportunity for China to not just be a great country or show greatness with respect to their Olympic program. They had to demonstrate to the world that they also valued people with disabilities. They had to put on a great Paralympics. And in many ways, they did. Um, there's still a lot of things that need to grow in China from what I've seen from the as an outsider looking at it. But they certainly did a lot of things really well in that games for people with disabilities. Um, the games itself was interesting because the team that I got to coach, our Canadian men's team, was it really in the middle of a dynastic run. You know, that core group of athletes that started together in 1997 would get to go to four straight gold medal games at the Paralympics, and that's just unheard of in Paralympic team sport, at least in wheelchair basketball. And 2008, it was starting to get it wasn't starting to get, it was getting really competitive. Wheelchair basketball had really started to evolve. The pro leagues in Europe had really started to develop athletes, and um, the competition was getting much, much more heated and closer. And that's the way it was that whole summer leading up to the games. The US was pretty dominant, pretty consistently winning against every country in the lead up to the games. And they were winning by an average of at least 10, 15 points, and often more than that. And they had a real powerhouse of a team. The Australians, again, really strong, and the British had really started to evolve and grow as a program and were really competitive. And there were still teams out there that were strong, like the Dutch or the Germans, or the Japanese were up and coming, and other countries. There are a bunch of countries coming up, in large part because of the value of wheelchair basketball worldwide and how much teams are investing and countries are investing. And that so it was a highly competitive and heated games. And I remember the semifinal against the US. The US had been beating everybody leading into that, pretty handily. And they basically would come out and they would go hard for about a quarter and a half of the game, and they would get up typically by about 15 to 20 points, and teams couldn't recover from that. And that was part of our game plan, was that we understood that that was going to happen. But what we'd also seen was the way that the US execution changed following that lead. They started to settle for outside shots, and they weren't as aggressive, a little bit slower coming out and attacking on defense and things like that. And I felt that if we could make them play a 40-minute game instead of a 15-minute game, we could compete with them. So we designed our game plan like that, and that's what ended up happening. We ended up being down by 16 points early in the game, and then we came back to tie it up, eventually beating them in double overtime. And it was phenomenal. It was an absolutely phenomenal game. If anybody ever gets a chance to watch that game online, I highly recommend it, because, and I know I'm biased because I was in the game, but I've never seen a game internationally as competitive as that, with as much in it. I consider arguably the greatest game all time in wheelchair basketball, because of the level of play of the two teams, and just the back and forth of it. It has all the moments you look for in great sporting events. The challenge with that game after we won, though, was that it had started. It was the last game at night. One day, it started at around just a little bit before 10 o'clock. We tipped off at night. And because it was a double overtime, we didn't finish until like 1 in the morning. We didn't get back to the village till like 2. You get a bite to eat. We're in bed by 3. So we weren't going to get a full day's recovery. And I made some mistakes. And we were talking about this before we got on air. There are 3 mistakes I made that I feel impacted that game and our performance. And those fall on me as the head coach. The first was the September before. I was not rigorous enough in the implementation of our strength and conditioning program. We kind of eased our way into it, and we should have jumped into it much harder. Our level of conditioning and fitness would have been higher overall, and we would have been better suited for the turnaround after that game. I know that sounds like that might be a stretch for some people. Like, how does your September strength and conditioning impact, the next September and a game that you play, one day? And I think it does. There's a bunch of strength and conditioning coaches out there saying, yes, absolutely, Frog, right there. Yeah, that's why strength and conditioning is important. But I do think it impacted how the depth of our fitness and our ability to recover in that day. I think the other thing too, I mentioned getting back really, really late. We had a process that I'd put in place where every day of a game we would have a shoot around, and we did certain things in our shoot around, and I wanted to stick with that. We had a day off in between the semifinal and the gold medal game, and on that day off, I had scheduled a shoot around and a walkthrough. But because we got back really late, I I had stuck with that. I should have canceled it that day and only done video. I should have let the guys sleep more. Uh, they still got a decent amount of sleep, but I don't think we got enough recovery. I shouldn't have done a walkthrough that day. I should have just done video. That's on me. And then the third thing, coming out of halftime, we were leading the Australians at the half. And we had control of the game. We were executing the way we wanted to. And I changed our tactics. I decided to do what we did coming out of the halftime of the U.S. game. Coming out of the half of the U.S. game, we pressed the U.S. I don't think that they expected that. I think it threw them off. It gave us control of the game, gave us opportunities to get to the rim. I thought we'll do this again against the Australians. It worked 2 days before against the U.S. Let's do it again. That tactic worked, and I shouldn't have done that because um, the Australians played a lineup that had two big players on it, two big 4-5s. And when we press, we only have one big 4-5, and that the Australians find a big mismatch against us, and that gave them an opportunity to get back in the game. I don't want to take anything away from the Australians. They had some great players. Troy Sachs, who is legendary with their team, he had probably his best international performance since back in 2004 in Athens. So 4 years before that, he had his best performance in the final. I think he had 17 or 19 points in that final game, and he really did a lot to help with the comeback that the Australians had. And of course, they have a lot of great players on that team. Brad Ness, Justin Everson, Tristan Knowles, a whole bunch, Sean Norris. They were all part of that, and obviously a legendary team themselves. But those are things that I could have done differently as a coach that I think would have put us in the situation where we might have been able to come away with that gold medal. And that would have meant that team, that group of players would have ended up going to 4 straight gold medal games, winning 4 straight gold medals. So just missed it by a bit. But that's sport.
Does that haunt you from a dynasty perspective that you had gold in Sydney, Athens, and then there's like a caveat with it. I obviously don't. I've never medaled at all, to be honest with everybody. So I probably now being retired from international sport. Oh gosh, we're getting closer to 15. I'd probably take the silver medal if you gave it to me. But from your perspective, or yeah, I'll stick to on the reflection for you, Michael. Does it haunt you?
Um, Haunt is an interesting word to use here. What I think for me is I always look at it in terms of what were we capable of doing, you know? And I've coached teams that when they got to the final, got to a national championship game, that was incredible for them. They had played, you know, they had played to their potential, and they lost in one team in particular lost in that I coached at the University of Illinois, lost in the national championship game. They lost a close game by it was like 5 points, and I that team played as close to its potential as any team I've ever coached. I look back on that loss with great pride. They'd accomplished absolutely. So I have no problems with that. That loss doesn't bother me because we did every single thing we possibly could and played to our potential. I think we didn't play as well as we were capable of that day against the Australians. We didn't bring our best game. And, I gave some reasons why I think I impacted our ability to do that. Um, I would want, I would want to, I would have wanted to see our best game that day, and I think I impacted our ability. So that part bothers me that we didn't bring our best that day. So I guess it haunts me in that respect. I would have liked to have seen what our best looked like that day against the Australians.
Well, that probably brings it to a nice point then, because obviously we've discussed before and what we were going to talk about via email correspondence, that probably goes nicely into team culture, because ultimately you're talking about playing to optimum performance, not playing to your best. From your opinion now, what does that come down to, team cohesion and creating a culture?
So I think that's a great question because we hear that word used a tremendous amount. We use that word culture used a lot. And it comes across as something that's really, really vague, I think, for a lot of people and a lot of coaches and a lot of athletes. And when I'm talking with coaches now in different teams and athletes about culture, what I talk about is really what are your values? I want to always start there. And that's about self-awareness. And you want to get a group of individuals together that share the same values and the behaviors that demonstrate those values. When you get a group of individuals together who have the same values and demonstrate those values the same way and have the same goal and doggedly pursue that goal, I think that's when you can get greatness out of a group of people, out of a team. And those Canadian players that I got to coach, those athletes I got to coach from 97 through the games in 2008, and I still keep in touch with all of them. That's a group of players that they shared the same values. They understood the behaviors that demonstrated those values. And then they looked for whatever path we could find using those values and behaviors to get to our goal. And our goal was simply, it was to win a gold medal at every single one of the games we went to. I remember vividly an example of the cohesion of that when we were getting ready for the games in Athens and we had just selected our team. We brought all the players together in a room where they were given their team uniform and a basketball. And we had them in a semicircle, and the lights were slightly dimmed and focused on the chairs and the spaces where the athletes were going to sit. And they all sat around. And we had won in Sydney in 2000. And we'd lost in Kitakyushu at the World Championships in 2002. So we hadn't played to our potential. But then we'd regained sort of that position in the world where we were viewed as one of the teams that could win the gold medal in Athens in 2004. And I wanted us to have real clarity on what the goal was going to be. And I thought that the goal of winning a gold medal wasn't clear enough. So when the athletes came in, I asked each one, what does winning a gold medal look like? Describe that picture. Because I wanted it to be, I didn't want there to be just, is it just win a gold medal by a little bit, by a lot? What's this look like? And we went around to each one of the players, and each one of the players, as they described it, the essence of what they described was that we wanted to win a gold medal in such a way that the other teams only considered the possibility of winning a silver medal. That us winning the gold medal was a foregone conclusion. The discussion was who was going to win the silver. And we talked a lot about what that would take. And that became our process. So, what did that mean in terms of shooting? What do we have to shoot? How are we going to have to practice our shooting to shoot that way? How were we going to have to get together? What was going to be the level of effort and commitment every time we got together? What was going to be the level of effort when our athletes were off training by themselves? How were we going to communicate with each other the level of effort we were giving, our work ethic when we didn't see each other? How were we going to sleep? What were we going to eat? Every single bit. And that became our process. And my job then was to remind us of that and keep us on that. And that's That speaks to a whole bunch of values. It speaks to work ethic. It speaks to integrity, because you got to be honest about what you're doing and not doing in those situations. It speaks to respect. It's learning from others and valuing each teammate and knowing your value to the team and how important it is that you do your work as part of the achievement of that goal. It's being responsible and disciplined. Discipline's a big one, and discipline is one of those things that I see as a difference maker. Discipline is doing, it's doing the difficult things. Anybody can do the easy things. It's doing the difficult things that takes discipline. That's when discipline comes into play. And that's what it was going to take. Being selfless, um, knowing you're doing everything for the team. And we had a saying, take care of the team and the team will take care of you. And that's how we functioned. And then lastly, there was I'll call it a curiosity. Sometimes people talk about growth mindset or lifelong learning. For us, it was more curiosity. And I say curiosity because that's exploring something new. That's innovation. That's moving yourself from where you are to a completely new place. And that's what we had to do. We had to be different and better than we'd been going into the World Championships in 2002. Because it was easy for teams to catch up to us then if we were staying in the same place. But if we're moving and going into completely new places, innovating ourselves, not only do they have to grow, they have to go and find where we are as well. And so we put all of those things together, and and that's what led to the performance we had in Athens. And we did that in each of the other games too. We did that leading into Sydney, probably not with as much focus because we were all young then. That was our first major games to be going together as a bunch of, I'll call it young kids, a young kid coach and young kid athletes. And they had it really refined when they went to London in 2012 and really understood putting that all together. But I think that getting back to the culture question, those are things that coaches have to do and athletes have to do. They have to understand what their values are. That's their identity. They have to agree on the behaviors that demonstrate them. And then they have to pursue those as the process that leads them to their goal. And it takes a lot of a discipline and focus to stay on that path.
Do you think that it's probably a simplistic way of tying that all together, Michael, of operating, of people operating as we talk about standards, like I think people get obsessed about Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, like what is people capable when it comes to the ceiling. But when you talk about discipline, people's values, those are their minimum standards, as this is the minimum we expect of each other. Do you think it is as it's not as simplistic as that, but that would be an easier perspective to people to get their head around? To let's you set your stall out as these are your standards, and then you can apply that to every aspect of your life.
So that's a great way of outlining the difference. So when I look at an athlete and I'm coaching them on the court, I don't ask for their minimum. I don't ask for them to meet the standard. I want their very best. I want everything they've got in that moment. And my commitment to them is in that moment, they are getting my 100%. One of the things I always talk about with athletes and with people, when I moved back to Canada and started coaching at our national academy, I wasn't coaching a team in games the way I had at U of I or with Team Canada. So I had to figure out what is my goal. You know, I wasn't coaching for a gold medal game. I wasn't doing that. I was growing athletes to maximize their potential. And so my goal each day was to coach a gold medal practice, to make sure that I brought my very best that day. That was my responsibility to the athletes. And in turn, that's what I expected from the athletes. I wanted their 100%. I didn't ever want them to meet a minimum standard. I wanted their maximum potential each and every day. We didn't get it each and every day. I know that. But that was the goal and the expectation every single day. And in doing that, what we were teaching the athletes and teaching our staff was how to prepare for a gold medal game. Because in a gold medal game, you want to play your very best. And maybe you win and maybe you don't, but you want to play your very best. To do that, you have to practice the process of playing your best. You have to practice focusing on technical skills and mastering execution. You have to focus. You have to practice the process of cue sorting and figuring out all the reads on the court, managing your arousal, pushing yourself when you're getting tired. All of those things, those are skills you practice. And so doing that each and every day, setting that standard, I think that's where high performance is. And so when I'm watching coaches and I see somebody say, "Yeah, it's pretty good. That's good enough." When I hear those phrases, pretty good and good enough, no, that's a minimum. That means there was room to grow, and we want that growth. And we're going to pursue that. And we're going to doggedly pursue that. And that's not for everybody. But for those individuals who want that high performance environment, for individuals who want to maximize their potential, I think that's the mindset you want to have.
Well, that's something I would agree with, because ultimately, because you mentioned an interesting perspective, like early on in this conversation, of you had the guys have curiosity. Most people wouldn't associate curiosity with high performance. Your because if people go away and look at Patrick's social media now, he is one for innovation with the chair, all sorts of things. So it's something that I think instinctively comes naturally to me when I have maybe that approach of growth mindset of I'm open to everything and anything, to kind of go, well, what is the possibilities with that? Obviously, the to look at that, there's thousands of opportunities with that, because it's whatever you take from it, and it's having the foresight to experiment and to I think even in your content you talk about, takes elements of people that you admire, implement it into it. Ultimately it becomes your own, because you can't become, to an extent, a carbon copy of somebody else, because you won't have the same traits, the skill sets as somebody else. So that's something, even I think about 2 seasons ago I coached our development team, and I had the idea initially, and nobody actually knows this, but I'll share it. It's a thought process that I had, and I was writing it down as, well, how can I get the players to get to the level and ability that I'm at? And then once I saw it written down, I went, well, that's not possible, and I'm doing them a disservice, because they would have skill sets that I have, would never be able to get to. So it's my position as a coach to raise their level of their potential, as this is what I think is coming back to what you said of, this is their top end potential, and ultimately if you far exceed that, I've done my job, because ultimately you've pushed the boundaries. So it got me thinking differently, to kind of going, well, my job is to make them a better player and to push them beyond what they perceive they are capable of. And that's probably where people look at my own performance as, why are you your harshest critic? It's something that's been indoctrinated in me from elite sport, that you look at literally everything under a microscope, which to some extent in the day to day world is not always helpful. But I think in the sporting arena, we're talking about marginal gains, and winning and losing is like finite. It's like it. Well, the obviously it's a game of inches is for Al Pacino quote, but that's the difference that we're talking about. If you have the aspirations of going to the very top.
Yeah, so it's a couple of thoughts, in behind what you're talking about. First thing, for curiosity, for me, I see curiosity. It leads to innovation. Innovation means something new. You're in a different place than you were, uh, and that was central to the teams. Our Canadian men's program from 2000 straight through to 2012 was constantly innovating after success at whatever, or close to success at whatever major world championships we were at. Our first question afterwards was always not just how do we improve what we're doing, but what are we going to add? We're going to add something. We're not going to be the same at the next major games, or world championships, Paralympic Games. We will be different. We will grow in some way, shape, or form. And to do that, I felt curiosity was needed. It's and it, like you mentioned, Patrick. Patrick's a perfect example of that. We had lots of other players that thought of different ways of doing things as well and did different things. Richard Peter, Joey Johnson, Jamie Borisov, Chris Stoutenberg, a bunch of players that had that kind of curiosity and going to try something new. So they weren't in the same place that they were before. I thought that piece was central. I thought the piece where you're constantly, you don't sit still. You grow, you become different. And in doing that, you're not just pushing yourself, you're pushing the sport itself too. And that was something that we wanted to do. We didn't just want to do it for our own success, but we wanted to push the sport so we could show people all of what was behind it. And then the last piece too, and this is why I coach, it is that it's the opportunity to teach an athlete of what's possible. When you're sitting there and you've coached athletes yourself, when you're working with an athlete on the court and they're struggling in a skill, whatever it might be, maybe it's a new athlete and they're struggling to make layups, and you're coaching them, you're giving them feedback, and there's a moment when that athlete, they make that layup, and there's almost a spark in their eye, a little twinkle as they look at you after the success of that. And behind that, you can see them thinking, man, I did that. I did that because of my effort, you know? And you can almost see behind that the question that comes to mind for them: I wonder what else is possible if I put in that kind of effort. In that moment, we have the seeds for greatness, because I think that's where greatness lies. When you ask yourself, what else is possible if I work hard enough with the right people? And I think that's the most fun in coaching is when we get a chance to work with an athlete and we get to see that kind of spark in their eye. And that happens dozens of times a day in practice as we work with athletes. And I think that's a way that we can be translated into society. I think that one of the things we want young athletes to do when they see people in sport, and they use them as role models, and they do, is we want them to think not about doing the specific things that a great athlete does, but understanding how that translates to them, How does discipline translate to their work life, their life? How does work ethic translate? What's integrity look like in their life and their goals and their process to become their own greatness? And I think that's the value of sport is it can teach everybody the process and path to their own greatness because I believe that everybody has that in them. We just want to help them find it.
Well, you mentioned a good point there, Michael, because ultimately, I think every athlete, when they start out on that journey to climb the ladder, the sport itself teaches you what you mentioned: discipline, integrity, fair play, sportsmanship, respect, and then it becomes who you are as the individual because you have those skills and traits built into you forevermore.
What I love about sport is it gives you an avenue to develop those aspects of yourself. But sport is the vehicle that you use to develop it. Um, I my career in coaching has been about helping the people who I coach develop their holistic potential. That means everything about them. When I was at the University of Illinois, it wasn't just about me teaching basketball skills. It was me helping them become the best student they could be, helping them become the best person they could be, the best community leader. It just happened I was using wheelchair basketball to do that. I think that same thing can happen in other avenues. I think sport is a great vehicle for us to use because sport is a language we all speak. And so that's why it translates so well in all aspects of life. But I think that these same things apply in other areas. You might be a teacher and or learning to be a teacher, and it you become the best person you can be, learning how you apply your values and your behaviors in teaching and growing who you are, that type of thing. So, um, I mean, I guess the thing I would say is that's the beauty of sport and why I love being involved in it so much is it is a language we all speak and it's a great place to grow who you are. It is not who you are, but it can grow, it can help you understand your values and the behaviors and how they apply in sport and other areas of your life.
That gets me thinking then. How has your own thinking changed over the course of your career going from the collegiate ranks and before that as well to where you are now in 2026 and as we progress into the future? How has your thinking evolved over that time?
It's a great question. I think that my thinking on things has um, has a great deal more depth to it now. I think I had some idea of what my values were when I first started coaching and what the behaviors were, but I wasn't as well equipped to communicate those things and to teach those things. The analogy I give to when I see different coaches is when I started coaching, I had a hammer and I had a saw. That was my toolbox. And now what I've got is I've got a hammer. I got a couple of different types of hammers. I got a bunch of different types of saws, a whole bunch of wrenches, different types of screwdrivers, all kinds of tools in the toolbox. And often what I see when I see young coaches, and the example I'll give, when I see a young coach yelling and screaming at athletes, that conveys to me that's a coach that doesn't have all the tools and they're just reaching for the hammer every time. And my job as a mentor coach or a coach that's teaching coaches is to help them see other tools that they can use to accomplish the same task. Because sometimes the hammer is the right tool for the job, but it's not the right tool for every job, and you can't use it to, you can use it to hammer nails, but you can't put screws in, not nearly as well without doing some damage. And so that's why you don't want to use a hammer all the time. Sometimes you want to use a screwdriver. Sometimes you want to use a wrench. So I think that's the thing I've learned over all my years is that I've expanded a number of tools that I can use to help grow an athlete's holistic potential.
And what do you put that down to? Do you think it's coaching experience, lived experience, observation, deeper thinking, a mixture of all of that?
It is. It's for me. There were certain things like one. I mentioned the curiosity, so I'm always curious. I want to find out more. I want to find out new things. I want to try new things, and so that willingness, I think, to be curious like that is important. The way I view failure helps in all this process. I don't see failure as a negative. I see every time we fail as an opportunity to learn. And learning is a good thing. Therefore, failure is not a bad thing. It's a good thing because we learn. We either learn something we should do or something we shouldn't do, but we learn. And so I don't have a problem with failure, which means I'm more willing to try things out. I'm not going to be reluctant to try something. Um, I've always tried to get a diverse body of experiences. And this goes back to learning and being curious. So as I was growing as a coach, I didn't just coach one type of athlete. I didn't just coach college athletes. I coached athletes from different countries. I coached men and women. I coached different age ranges of athletes, and that gave me a really diverse experience. I've always had a strong reflective mindset. After every single practice, I sit down and I think back on what went well and what I need to keep, what I need to get rid of. And I literally make notes on my practices like that. And I've got practices I've like the last 30 years saved up, and you'll see those notes on practices. I'll do debriefs with the people around me, whether it's the assistant coaches I've got or mentors. I'll sit down and debrief with them. One of the most profound parts of my learning experience was when I went to the University of Illinois and was coaching there. Every day after practice, I would go over to our athletic department, and Marty Morris, who's our legendary wheelchair track coach, was one of my mentors. He and I would sit down and we'd debrief on practice. Every day I had a mentor that was giving me thoughts on what I'd done in practice, what went well, what could be done better. And then the presence of mentors, like I mentioned, Marty Morris, Brad Hedrick, key people who uh, constantly grew me beyond just where I was, challenged me in the way I thought, pushed me to find my own potential as a coach. So I think all of those things constantly grew me. It was the breadth of repetitions that I got, uh, being reflective, having mentors around me, being curious, and my approach to failure as a positive that caused learning. I think all of those things combined to help me grow. I think those are things that we want in athletes too. We want the same mindset in athletes, just applied on a single individual instead of a whole team.
So, in other words, Michael, did you seek out criticism then to be able to refine that way of thinking, the practices, every ounce of it to refine the process?
Absolutely, constantly. If you talk to my wife will tell you that I'm constantly asking for feedback, and she says she actually finds it a little bit irritating. I use the term feedback different than criticism. We look at criticism as something negative. I want to know what you think I did well, because I want to make sure I keep doing those things and I don't just guess at what's going right. And I want to know what things need to be changed. And I say changed more than I say, that they're mistakes or anything like that. Because often the things that we we would describe as mistakes, they actually just need to be altered slightly. They're the right idea, maybe with the wrong execution or refinements around that.
Why does your that this is probably more out of curiosity for me. Why did your wife find that irritating that you want feedback all the time? Because I think that I find that fascinating.
Because sometimes she gets remember she gets asked that question, or she sees me ask that question all the time, and sometimes she's just like, why can't you just be satisfied with where you are? Why can't you just be satisfied with what we did? Stuff like this. And I mean, sometimes it can be feedback about some pretty trivial things, but that's just my mindset.
But is that just how locked in you are in towards the overall process of if I can tweak it and get it as okay, perfection is impossible, but as in as close to excellence on any given day, if I can get close to 100% for any given person, that is their very best.
Yeah, for me it's the pursuit of excellence. It's that process. That's what I enjoy. I completely understand. I will not be perfect. I'm going to make mistakes. The athletes I'm going to coach, they're going to make mistakes. The people I'm going to be working with, they're going to make mistakes. We acknowledge that, but we want to get as close to our potential as we possibly can. And it's that pursuit each day that it's that part of the experience and journey that we want. It's the pursuit of it, the chase, if you will. I like that, and I want to see how close I can get to it each and every day. And when I achieve something, then the next thing is okay. So I've achieved that. What else is now possible? And I'm also the type of person too that it's if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do it that way. I'm going to be all in, or I don't want to do it.
Where does that come from for you specifically then, Michael, in terms of the all in way of thinking?
It just goes back to I don't know where it comes from. Like when I've had conversations with my parents when I was a kid growing up, um, in different areas, I would do stuff like that. I would be all in, or yeah, I'm not interested in doing it. And it's there's I think I just really enjoy that process of uh, of seeing how close I can get to my potential, and then now as a coach, how I can help people get as close to that and go through that experience. I can remember that I remember uh, in Sydney after we won the gold medal game and we went back into the locker room. I remember saying to the guys, I didn't have a long speech or anything, basically saying to them, you know, there's not a lot you can say in life about different things, but today we get to say that at least for today, we're the very best in the world at wheelchair basketball. That may change tomorrow, but for today, that's the truth. Today we played to our potential. Our potential might be different tomorrow, but let's savor today. And so it's that pursuit of our potential. And then the realization that when you get there, it's looking for the next new thing that gets added to that. Because each time you accomplish something, a new possibility presents itself because you've acquired a skill, an ability, knowledge, wisdom, whatever it might be. And that opens up new potential. So that means we have constant opportunity to grow and see how much we can do.
So for your coaching lifetime, and I never thought I would ask this question this way, have you seen younger athletes utilizing social media in terms of like from a curiosity perspective, there's never been a perfect time to be able to get better at wheelchair basketball or any skill to that matter than now, because obviously we have the extension of social media and also we have the creation of AI. So if you have the curiosity with your own thinking to push the boundaries, literally the information is so readily available now and at your fingertips. Is it not scary to think that where these younger athletes can push the boundaries of the sport or anything to that matter, but if they were to utilize all their tools at their disposal now and going forward?
That's a great question. And I've had lots and lots of conversations about um, the role of social media in athletic performance, the emerging role of AI in high performance and coaching in sport. And a couple things come to mind. They come to mind from watching coaches, watching our system, from myself, and from watching my kids as they interact. And a couple things I would say. The first thing that I think is going to be a challenge for this generation, and the generation I'm referring to are my kids as they come up, um, with respect to social media, is there's such a flood of information. One of the things they're going to have to learn is to discern what is the truth. That will be a challenge. What is the right information to pursue? And I don't know. I don't know if I have an answer to that right now, but that is going to be a challenge because, to your point, there's a lot of information out there, and I've gone online and I've done some surfing and things like this and seen different stuff, and I'll see different posts on different things, and I'll be like, no, that's not quite right. That's misleading. Second thing tied to social media is that the way things get presented, they the clean, neat, fluffy version always gets presented. And it's personal growth, learning is not like that. Learning is messy. And I think it's misleading in social media when you see the great clip and it shows somebody, I saw one the other day. I can't remember, it was a kid from Argentina, took a shot from half court, goes in, nothing but net. That makes it look like everybody's supposed to hit their half court shots. That doesn't show the layups that had to be taught first. It doesn't show the 15-foot jumpers they had to learn, the 3-point shot. It doesn't show the hours in a gym learning how to fall through a certain way. It doesn't show any of that. It's misleading. And so I think that's a challenge, is social media doesn't show us that learning is messy and that there's a lot of failures along the way. And how do you actually deal with that? So I think there's those two things. I think that AI is interesting because it does have a lot of potential, but there's a part in growing as an athlete where a coach plays a really important role. And this goes back to discerning the truth and learning being messy. When you have a coach working with you as an athlete, you develop a relationship with that coach. And that relationship's founded on trust. And that coach is going to ask you to do things that are going to be uncomfortable. They're the things that stretch you as an athlete, cause you to try something new, to put you in a new place. You do that because the coach is working with you and you trust that that coach's pathway is the right path and that they are there to help you. That is their goal. It's not to help themselves, it's to help you. I don't think AI can do that. I don't think AI can provide you with the relationship you need as an athlete to push yourself into those new spaces. And then the last thing I think that with all of with social media and with AI and things, I think it suggests that there's a shortcut, an easy way to get to excellence. There isn't an easy way. There is no shortcut to excellence. It simply comes about through hours of meticulous, focused, hard work. That's it. It's the Michael Jordan quote where he talks about, he's missed something like 23,000 shots in his life. He's you know, failed to hit the winning basket like 150 times or something like that. And the reason why I was able to do that, it's because of all the time in the gym that he's put in before that. His success, his 6 NBA championships and the game winning shots he's hit, that's the result of all the misses that nobody sees in the gym. The hours he put in there. I remember one time hearing about a figure skater hit some amazing triple, I don't know, spinning move. I don't know the language of figure skating, and nailed it at the Olympic Games. And the athlete was interviewed afterwards, and she said, nobody saw the 23,000 times I missed that in practice. That's what we have to be willing to do to be excellent. We have to be willing to put the work in, the time in, and the failures in to learn from it so we can get to our potential. And I think that social media sometimes that may not be supportive of that, and AI may not be supportive of that in the way it needs to. And it may suggest there's a different way you can get to your excellence, and there isn't. It requires that kind of effort and focus, and it's not glamorous. You yourself as an athlete, the times that you spend in a gym by yourself, and there's a lot of those times, there's nothing glamorous about that.
Well, I think that's the misconception that the I think it's not misconception so to speak, but as in it's the fascination for people outside of that bubble to what is the games like, what is a village like. It's like, well, it's nothing luxurious. It is until you get there. Obviously, one games is not the same as the next, but it wouldn't matter if the athletes from the UK, Canada, the US, somewhere in Africa, Asia. Ultimately, the process is the same. Obviously, it comes down to hard work and things like that, and fine tuning and sharpening their craft to get to the pinnacle. But where I always thought it was interesting is this fascination on looking inwards. So you mentioned early on in the episode of finish your game at 1 in the morning, getting back to the village at 2 o'clock in the morning, having to eat. I don't think people realize some of the. Okay, it is a form of sacrifice, but in terms of some of the hardship that happen after the fact of eventualities that you can never prepare for, so that's an uncontrollable. It is part and parcel of team sport. You're gonna have overtimes. Ultimately, it could be 1, there could be 2, there could be 3. I've never known any more than that. But as in, the US is not going to give you that position in the final, and vice versa. And that's a long-established rivalry, the US and Canada, irrespective of wheelchair basketball. So there's not going to be any position given with that to get to the final. So I think the interesting part of it from the outside is the assumptions and bias that people think.
Yeah, the athletes' village, for the Paralympic Games and Olympic Games, there's nothing glamorous about that. As you mentioned, those are just a bunch of apartment buildings, and you stay in a small little room with a bed that's generally not the most comfortable. Like it's dorm living, is what it is. It's when we're when we're getting ready for the games, we stay in better hotels leading up to the competition than what we get when we get to the games. And I'm not saying we're staying in five-star hotels, but the games it's like dorm living. And it's very focused. The reason why we're there is we've spent 4 years, 8 years, whatever it might be, preparing for that. And so the focus is on our performance and doing the things that maximize our performance. We have to, as part of that, make sure, I believe, that we also take in the experience. I think that's extremely important. And you mentioned seeing athletes from other countries. I think it's important to recognize that and see them and take time to take it all in, because the village, while it is austere, is also unique. It's an example of how the world actually can get along. Because you don't, and you've been in the village yourself, you don't have a whole lot of fights in the village. And I think in my time in 6 Paralympic Games, I saw one fight in the village the entire time. And that was between two individuals that had a bit of well, they'd been carrying a bit of animosity between them from outside the village. It just happened that they got put in close quarters. But that, I think, is our potential, right? If we can have all these people from all these different countries existing in tight quarters in an intense competitive environment, and we can not have conflict, we can understand we're competing and respect that. And I think that's our potential as well in society on this planet as a whole. It shows our potential. I think that's an important thing to take from that experience. That's probably one of the things that stands out for me. And then the other piece, like you mentioned, um, our time in the village, it is a it's not glamorous like people think on the outside. What it is, it's focused. It's focused on performance, and everything we do is really designed to maximize our performance. So we're in that pursuit of that goal. And then the last thing, things will go wrong. The village is not perfect. I have an expression that I've always used with our athletes, and that is the bus is always late. At some point, something's going to go wrong. The bus is going to be late. You're going to get there, and they're not going to have the type of food you want to eat in the cafeteria because they've run out because, I don't know, such and such team got there first and they ate all of the pork chops or all of the steaks or all of the hamburgers or whatever it is, all of the rice you wanted to eat. And you've got to be able to deal with those kinds of things. That's part of being a high performance athlete and maximizing your potential. It's being able to adapt when things go sideways and you don't have perfect conditions, but you can still bring out your potential. You can still achieve your potential. And that, I think, is one of the things that differentiates the athletes that maximize their potential at the games. Often the ones we see on the podium, not always, sometimes other athletes too, that maximize their potential, and it doesn't result in a podium finish. It's they've been the ones that have dealt with the distractions and the disruptions the best. And I think one of the things for coaches and athletes to recognize as they're watching, and listening to this podcast, that should happen before you get to the games. You should have a less than perfect journey to get there. You should have ups and downs. Each one of those ups and downs you learn from, and they prepare you for the ones that are going to happen at the games, because they will happen at the games. Guaranteed. 100%. I remember in Sydney, one of our team captains got sick the first day when we moved into the village, and we had to move him to isolation, and we were missing a team captain for all of our preparation before our first game. And when he finally got better, uh, he could play in our first game, but only for modified minutes, and that threw our team off. He was our emotional heartbeat, and so we lost that piece, and we had to figure out how do we maximize our potential when our team captain is sick in bed. In Athens in 2004, we had a whole different type of pressure. The expectation was that we're great every single time. We were going to get every single team's best game. So we had to be prepared to bring our best game every time. There wasn't going to be an off game for us because everybody was preparing for us. That's a different type of focus we had to have. Beijing in 2008, we hadn't had our team together, our core team together the whole 4 years. So we'd had coaching changes, a whole bunch of disruptions in our program. We'd had some things happen leading up to the games that were distractions. We had to figure out how to overcome that. 2012, I wasn't the head coach in 2012. I had stepped away from the program, and my assistant coaches from before had stepped in, Jerry Tonello and Paul Bowes, and they were leading the team. And that was a whole different experience. And so there's constantly things that we had to figure out and deal with. And every team has those. And what you do is you focus on the ones that your team has and what you can control, and you don't get pulled into what other teams have going on.
That moves me nicely to closing out the show, Michael. This is a question I like to ask of all of my guests. If you got to sit down with any athlete or coach for that matter, dead or alive, who would that be and why?
Wow, who would I want to sit down and have conversations with? Um, Probably that's an interesting one. There's a lot. There's a lot that as you asked that question, at first I had a couple of names pop in my head, but then I thought, oh no, hold on. I'd like to talk to this person. Oh, I'd like to talk to this person. Oh, I'd like to talk to this person. Um, so as a basketball person, there are probably an athlete and a coach that I would like to have conversations with. And this goes back to people who I read and learned from as a young kid growing up. One would be John Wooden. I think that's an easy one for most uh, coaches to ask, but I'd love to really dive into some questions with Coach Wooden and and learn from him a particularly a bunch of things around leadership and some things around uh, the precision that he expected. Because precision is one of the things I think that differentiates the very best from the next best, and how you go about executing things. Another person that I would want to chat with is Bill Russell, the great legendary basketball player. And because I remember reading a story he had written talking about a game that he was in, and it was a professional game. I can't remember when he was playing with the Celtics, and I can't remember who he was playing, but they had a section of the game that he referenced where the flow of the game was such it was as if the game was being played perfectly by both teams. And there are a number of possessions back and forth in that game. And it looked like everybody was completely in perfect sync for executing at the highest level. And he said it happened for a number of possessions, and then an official blew a whistle to call a foul or make a call or something like that. And the call was helping the Celtics, but Bill Russell was angry at the official because he'd upset that flow, that experience. That for that moment, he had had an opportunity to experience what I'll loosely describe as a perfect game. He'd been part of that moment. that's achieving your potential and getting to be part of that, not just by yourself, but with another group of individuals. So I would love to dive into that moment and what that was like for him, or how he knew it was that moment, that type of thing. So those are probably two that I would think of off the top of my head that would be conversations I'd love to have, to dive into their experience as an athlete pursuing their potential on the case of Bill Russell, and then leadership and precision in coaching with Coach Wooden.
And then my final question before we wrap up the episode is, what would be your parting wisdom that you would want people to take away from our episode today?
Parting wisdom.
Or have them think about differently?
What I would say is one of the most important things for an athlete or a coach is to really understand their values and the behaviors that demonstrate those values. That's who they are. And then find the place in sport that you belong with those values and those behaviors. If you can find that, you'll find a place where you have an opportunity to thrive and grow and maximize your potential.
So, Michael, thanks once again, for coming on the Mindset Athlete podcast.
No problem. Glad to be here. And it's a lot of fun having this conversation today.